speedrunning my answers to the 2024 APES exam FRQs so you can see how you did. This is set 1. Starting off in letter A, we're going to have zone C. Then when we get to letter B, as BOD increases, DO levels are going to decrease because bacteria are going through aerobic decomposition. When we get to letter C, that's going to be zone B where the pollution is introduced. When we get to letter D, it's going to be the number of macroinvertebrates or the species richness of macroinvertebrates. Then when we get to E, we need a hypothesis. So the lower the dissolved oxygen in a zone, the lower the macroinvertebrate species count is going to be, or the species richness is going to be. In letter F, the researchers use zone A because it's upstream from where the pollution is introduced. So that means it's going to have a background DO level and macro level that you can compare the downstream contaminated zones with. When we get to letter G, this collecting data in the winter is going to increase the dissolved oxygen levels across all zones as cold water holds more dissolved oxygen. So we might see an increase in species that are especially sensitive to dissolved oxygen levels. In H, if we have raw sewage being introduced, there's going to be new bacteria populations introduced. So we'd see an increase in non-native bacteria populations in the stream, especially fecal coliform bacteria. We get to letter I, we have things like pH, temperature, amount of sunlight reaching the water. And finally, in letter J, we're going to have bioaccumulation at lower levels in the trophic food pyramid. That's going to be because these pollutants are fat soluble, so they build up in the fat tissues. Then they biomagnify to higher and higher concentrations in organisms at the top of the trophic pyramid because they're eating everything beneath, taking in all the pops from those organisms. It's going to lead to things like reproductive failure in organisms. Whales can have stillbirths when they have too many PCBs in their bodies, and large predatory birds can have thinning of their eggshells and failure to reproduce. Now on to FRQ 2, in letter A, we're going to have 50 square meters. In B, it's going to be type 3 survivorship. In C, this high biotic potential of these R. strategist beetles is going to mean they can rapidly reproduce, grow in population size really rapidly, and produce protein for humans really rapidly. And that's going to be in contrast to K strategists who reproduce more slowly. They take a long time to reach sexual maturity, so it just takes longer to produce that protein for humans. When we get down to letter D, there's going to be, I think, 11 fewer kilograms of CO2 equivalent greenhouse gases produced from chicken versus pork. So this is going to be less of a contribution to global warming, and that's going to lead to less sea level rise and less flooding of coastal habitats. When we get down to letter E, because they're producing methane in addition to all the CO2 that comes from land use changes, producing food for the other animal protein sources, they have all those same CO2 outputs, but they're going to have methane outputs as well. And because methane has such a higher greenhouse warming potential than carbon dioxide, this means that beef is going to have a higher contribution to global warming than other protein sources. Letter F, we're probably going to have a decline in water quality with an increase in turbidity, which limits photosynthesis. And that's due to cattle overgrazing and leading to topsoil erosion and then runoff of sediments into that body of water. For G, we could solve this by using rotational grazing, where we move cattle to different areas within a rangeland before they overgraze and kill the root structure in the area that destabilizes the topsoil and leads to that runoff and erosion. Then we want another sustainable agricultural practice, so we could use cover crops in between the harvest and then the replanting of our main crop. That's going to stabilize the soil in the area. And then an additional advantage here is you could turn that cover crop into green manure. So you could kind of mulch it, add it back to the soil. That's going to add nutrients and increase the organic matter of the topsoil layer. And then we want to know how it's going to be affected negatively by climate change. So we could say something along the lines of increased storm intensity as climate change adds more heat to the atmosphere and gives storms greater intensity. That's going to lead to things like washing away of crops, flooding of crops, and just an overall decline in yield from these, heavy rains that kind of destroy crops. Right, on FRQ 3, in letter A, we're going to have uranium-235. You can probably just say uranium. I don't know that you need the isotope name. Letter B, we're going to have thermal pollution in bodies of water as warm water holds less dissolved oxygen, and that could lead to things like suffocation in fish species that require higher amounts of dissolved oxygen. We're going to skip down to letter D, and we're going to have the advantage of decreased particulate matter in the atmosphere, which means fewer hospitalizations from asthma-related events for humans. And then we get down to letter E. An additional advantage is it's going to provide additional habitat for organisms that rely on a forest for their habitat, and that's going to increase biodiversity since a wider range of species now have a habitat and food source. And for the 3 math questions, I'm just going to put the answers on the screen up here. Best of luck, everybody. I hope that you all thought like mountains, wrote like scholars. Set number 2 is coming soon. Good luck.